Charles II of Austria, also known as Charles II of Spain, was born on November 6, 1661, in Madrid, Spain. He was the son of King Philip IV of Spain and his second wife, Queen Marian of Austria. This union produced 5 children, with Charles being the youngest. His father had previously been married to Queen Isabel of Bourbon, and from this marriage, only their daughter, Maria Theresa of Austria, survived. Maria Theresa went on to become the Queen Consort of France when she married King Louis XIV. Philip IV also had many half-siblings from his extramarital affairs, and it is believed that he had over 40 illegitimate children. The king's luck with offspring from his wives was not favorable. From his first marriage, only 1 daughter survived, and from his second marriage to his niece, only 2 children lived to adulthood, Margaret Theresa and Philip Prospero. However, just 5 days before Charles was born, Philip Prospero passed away. The birth of Charles was surrounded by sadness as he arrived into the world following the death of the heir to the throne, and there were immediate concerns about his ability to survive the early months of life. His appearance shocked those who saw him, with scabs covering his head and many skin eruptions. The Spanish crown pinned all its hopes on this frail child. He was raised with intense care and was protected from any physical exertion. Charles soon began to show signs that he was far from a normal child. He didn't speak until the age of 4, and he couldn't walk without assistance until he was 8. Furthermore, he had significant difficulties learning basic skills such as reading and writing. Many scholars believe that Charles suffered from Klinefelter syndrome, a condition that causes an underdeveloped, frail appearance, learning difficulties, and often leads to infertility. Aside from this syndrome, he also experienced various health issues and physical anomalies, such as lameness, epilepsy, muscle pain, chronic migraines, and a susceptibility to fevers, colds, and influenza. Charles had the typical Habsburg jaw, which made it difficult for him to speak properly. Although his speech was sometimes understandable, he often struggled with eating or keeping his mouth closed due to his fragile health and visible weakness. The people began to believe that the Prince of Asturias was cursed or under a powerful spell, which is why he earned the nickname the Bewitched. The belief in this curse was so widespread that even Charles came to believe that he was truly cursed. On September 17, 1665, his father, King Philip IV, passed away, and Charles ascended to the throne of Spain as King Charles II. But he was only 4 years old at the time. As a result, his mother, Marian of Austria, became his regent. The childhood of Charles II was marked by a great deal of uncertainty, health challenges, and the specter of the curse that many believed he carried. The reign of Charles II passed through a turbulent period filled with palace intrigues, political problems, and criticism of his mother and her favorites, as well as the ongoing power struggle between the widowed queen and one of the illegitimate sons of Philip IV, John Joseph of Austria. These misunderstandings led to the exile of the queen's right-hand man, the clergyman John Everardo Nizar. During those years, everyone believed that the young king would never reach adulthood due to his health issues. His education was neglected because of his learning difficulties, and there were little hopes for him. In 1675, Charles was declared of legal age at the age of 14, but his mother and her favorite, Ferdinand de Valenzuela, continued to govern in the king's name, creating many enemies. In 1677, his half-brother, John Joseph of Austria, entered Madrid with a small army and took control of the court. Queen Marian of Austria was separated from her son and the regency, and Ferdinand of Valenzuela was exiled from Spain. Charles grew into a short young man with an elongated neck and face. His jaw and lips were typical of the Habsburg family, and his nose was large and aquiline. His skin was delicate and pale, with blue eyes and long blonde hair. He walked with a hunch and had memory problems. Despite his issues with speech and learning, he was intelligent and capable of independent thought and simple decision-making. However, he was slow in both movement and reasoning, lacked willpower, and was calm and clumsy. John Joseph of Austria became his brother's favorite, and the situation in Spain and at court began to improve significantly. Charles was continually encouraged by his brother to take the reins of the kingdom and to act independently. From then on, the monarch started to gain more autonomy, although he still needed help with many matters. At the time, efforts began to find him a bride, as there was urgency for him to marry and produce heirs in case he passed away unexpectedly. The chosen bride was finally Princess Maria Luisa of Orleans, the niece of French King Louis XIV, who was married to Charles' half-sister, Maria Theresa of Austria. It is said that Charles immediately fell deeply in love with his fiancée upon seeing her portrait and considered her the most beautiful woman in the world. However, the wedding had to be delayed when, in 1679, his brother John Joseph of Austria passed away, leaving Charles lost and without guidance. He sought help from his mother, who had been confined to the Alcazar of Toledo for 3 years. When the queen returned and learned of her son's planned marriage to Maria Luisa of Orleans, she vehemently opposed it. However, Charles paid no heed to her objections, leaving Marian bewildered by the change in her son. He was no longer a child without personality, but had become a young man fully capable of making decisions. In early November 1679, Charles traveled to Quintana Pala in Burgos, where his wedding to Maria Luisa was to take place. The young king was very eager and excited to meet the young woman who had captured his heart after seeing only her portrait. When the princess arrived in the town, she began organizing everything for the wedding. It is said that Charles could not wait for the wedding day and disobeyed his advisors and attendants by barging into the princess's chamber. Maria Luisa was both impressed and startled by the king's sudden appearance. When the young princess saw the king entering her room without warning, she was confronted with a weak, sickly, and unattractive man who looked quite frail. At first glance, the princess was greatly disappointed with her future husband. On the other hand, Charles was quite pleased. He found his fiancée much more beautiful and attractive than he had expected. On November 11, 1679, the couple was married. He was 8 years old at the time of the union, and she was 16. Shortly after their marriage, the couple moved to Madrid. At first, Maria Luisa seemed like a very unhappy princess. She didn't feel at home in the Spanish court, and she was repulsed by her husband's physical appearance. Charles, deeply in love, soon realized that his wife wasn't happy in Spain, so he did everything he could to make her happy. He organized parties and banquets in her honor to liven up the dull Spanish court and constantly showered her with gifts. Maria Luisa was very grateful and began to grow closer to the king. She came to know him better, and they even began sharing the same bed. Gradually, she began to grow fond of him. She would never love him as much as he loved her, but they came to understand each other perfectly and developed a deep affection for each other. They cared for each other so much that they always tried to stay together. Charles continued to reign, but with the help of a group of advisors and powerful men who remained by his side, offering advice and new ideas. The most notable of these were the Duke of Medina Celi and the Count of Oropesa, who held the most power and influence over the king. In 1683, the War of the Spanish Succession broke out between Spain and France, ending the peace treaty the two kingdoms had signed with the king's marriage to Maria Luisa. Then, in 1688, the 9 Years' War began. Although Charles' marriage was a happy one, it was always overshadowed by the persistent issue of infertility. Everyone blamed the queen for not being able to conceive, which led Maria Luisa to undergo numerous treatments to help her get pregnant. These accusations placed immense pressure on the queen for not providing her husband with an heir. However, today it is known that the problem was not with her, but with Charles. as the syndrome he suffered from caused his infertility. In 1689, the young queen passed away, and Charles mourned her deeply, showing himself to be a man utterly devastated by her loss. Some believe the queen was poisoned due to the potions she had been taking in an attempt to conceive, while others believe she died from appendicitis. Charles was completely crushed by the death of his wife and refused to marry again. However, he was eventually convinced by his advisors and his mother, Marian of Austria, as an heir was urgently needed. It was decided that he should remarry. Among all the candidates presented to be the new queen, Marian of Neoburgo was chosen. She didn't have as much royal blood as the late Maria Luisa, but she came from a very fertile family. Her parents had managed to conceive 23 children. As was customary, the couple exchanged portraits before the marriage. When Charles saw the portrait of his new fiancée, he didn't show much interest. His advisors tried to encourage him by praising the girl in the portrait, assuring him that she was quite beautiful. The king listened attentively to his trusted men, and then his attention turned to the portrait of his late and beloved wife. He remarked, "This one was beautiful." On May 14, 1690, the wedding between Charles and Marian of Neoburgo was hastened and took place at the royal palace of Valladolid. At that time, Charles was 28 years old. At the time of their marriage, Charles was 28 years old, and Marian was 22. Charles was not very excited about his new wife, but he respected her at all times and always treated her correctly, maintaining a cordial relationship. On the other hand, Marian was a very unpleasant woman, both with the king and with the court and the people, creating many enemies around her. She was also very ambitious and selfish. Initially, she enjoyed the support of her mother-in-law, Marian of Austria, but her behavior caused a great distance between them, leading to a strained relationship. Over time, the new queen managed to dominate the king, becoming the one who truly reigned from the shadows, and the one who chose the men who formed part of the group of advisors. The couple also shared the common desire for offspring, with Marian de Neoburgo feeling immense pressure as everyone placed their hopes on her, given her background from a very fertile family. However, when the queen failed to conceive, she resorted to feigning pregnancy in order to not lose the king's favor or her position within the court and continue to be the Queen of Spain, thus maintaining her power. Charles' health continued to worsen, but he still participated in some public events, such as attending the Plaza Mayor in Madrid in 1683 to witness the burning of 20 people by the Holy Inquisition. Over time, Charles began to withdraw from public events and spent most of his days locked in the palace, suffering from severe pain and health problems. The following years were disastrous for him, as he faced many military defeats and deteriorating relations with other countries, such as France. In 1696, he mourned the death of his mother. He deeply missed his beloved wife, Maria Luisa, and witnessed several uprisings from merchants in Madrid due to bad harvests. He also saw Spain ravaged by a famine in 1698. All of this contributed to a significant decline in his mental health. Charles also suffered from gout and became a very recluse man. It was even believed that the curse he supposedly had could be cured through various exorcisms. He underwent numerous treatments to improve his health, including drinking the blood of freshly sacrificed animals, taking powdered bones of martyrs and saints in wine or food, and even ingesting viper powder mixed with chocolate. They placed dead pigeons on his head and hot lamb entrails on his abdomen, but nothing solved his physical or mental issues. Charles eventually became aware that he would never have heirs and truly believed he was cursed. Desperate, he sought a successor and decided that his heir would be the grandson of his older sister, Margaret Theresa of Austria. This child was named Joseph Ferdinand, but once again, tragedy struck the king as the child passed away at just 6 years old. Distressed by what would happen after his death and overwhelmed by everything going on around him, Charles followed the advice of the exorcists, who suggested that perhaps, if he opened the tombs of his ancestors, his curse could be lifted. When the king arrived at the Escorial monastery with his wife and trusted men, he ordered the tombs of his ancestors to be opened. The first to be opened were those of Philip and Anna of Austria, followed by those of Philip III and Margaret of Austria. Later, he asked for the tomb of his half-brother, Balthazar Charles, to be opened. Balthazar Charles had been the heir to the Spanish throne and had died in adolescence. Finally, he requested that the tomb of his father, King Philip IV, be opened, and when he saw his decomposed body, he embraced it. And he cried a lot. Finally, he left the tombs of his mother, whose body was in perfect condition and showed no signs of decomposition, and his first wife, Maria Louisa of Orleans. When they opened her tomb, the king was deeply moved to see his beautiful wife in such a state. She had been dead for 10 years, and her body was remarkably well preserved with little decomposition. The last tomb to be opened was that of his half-brother, John of Austria. It is said that it was in very poor condition and emitted such a stench that everyone had to leave immediately. Charles was deeply affected psychologically, and after seeing the body of his beloved wife, his health continued to deteriorate daily, and he still had no heir. Marian of Neoburgo, his wife, convinced the king to adopt a will that would recognize her nephew, Archduke Charles of Austria, as his successor, the future Holy Roman Emperor Charles II. But just before his death, Charles changed the will once again, naming Prince Philip of Bourbon, the future Philip of Spain, as his heir. Many historians debate the reason for this last-minute change. Some believe he decided this because of his familial connection to his first wife, while others think his poor health was exploited to influence him. There are also those who claim that the will was forged by the Bourbon family of France. On November 1st, 1700, Charles died at the age of 38. Although it is said that his appearance was that of an elderly man, his body was subjected to an autopsy. According to reports, he had no blood left in his body. His heart was the size of a peppercorn. His lungs were severely damaged. His intestines were rotting. He had only one black testicle, and his head was filled with water. The king's remains were laid to rest in the Escorial monastery. His death marked the end of the Habsburg dynasty in Spain, and with it, the Bourbon family began to reign. Charles' death also marked the beginning of the War of Spanish Succession. The kingdom was divided into two factions. One supported the Bourbons, while the other supported the Habsburgs. This war would last 13 years, ending with a victory for Philip V of Spain. Charles was a king who went down in history as the last of his dynasty. It has long been believed that he had a mental disability, but this is not true. Charles showed moments of lucidity and intelligence, though he was below the average. He was capable of ruling, even if with much support, but he became accustomed to others ruling in his place and imposing many limits on him, which turned him into an ineffective ruler. His poor health marked him for life, deeply affecting him psychologically and turning him into a person unable to do anything, earning him a lasting reputation as a failed monarch.